Welcome to Environment Long Island. I'm Karl Grossman. The subject, sustainability with Professor Scott Carlin. I'm with Professor Scott Carlin of the Post campus of Long Island University, and his specialty, he teaches it, he writes about it, sustainability. Now, Scott, you're a native of Merrick on Long Island, not exactly the most sustainable community in the world. It's not Woodstock. How did you get into, and why did you get into sustainability?
So Merrick is a diverse community. It's right on the water, close to Jones Beach, one of the great public beaches of the East Coast. So there were a lot of elements of life in Merrick that connected me to the natural world, wanting to protect the oceans and understanding how important all of that was to lots of people who choose Merrick as a home, even if the lifestyles in Merrick are lavish.
Well, I don't want to besmirch Merrick, but you kind of think of it as, well, a component of the suburban sprawl.
A leading component, yes.
Which envelops all of Nassau County.
Yes.
And that's not too sustainable, suburban sprawl, no?
It hasn't been. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to work on over the next 25 years. We've got some major challenges in front of us here on Long Island. And I think a lot of communities, Patchogue has been a great example of this on Long Island, have been redesigning their downtowns, making them denser, more walkable, making the Long Island Railroad train stop a more central pivot to what they have downtown. Patchogue has brought more housing downtown. They've seen a lot of restaurants open up, nightlife open up. And I think that's given a lot of other communities on Long Island some inspiration for how to think differently about the future of Long Island. We may still be in cars on Long Island, but we should be using more diverse modes of transit, and we have to have transit-oriented development in order for that to happen. We have to have the development closer to the town centers.
Do people want it? I mean, it just seems to me that migration from the city to single-family homes on Long Island, and everybody has a little house and their driveway and their car, and then the shopping center is. That seems to be something that, well, certainly in the last several decades, people have sought.
Correct. But we know young people are very eager to seek out something different now. Young people have been moving back to the city in larger numbers, not really thinking about the suburban lifestyle as the lifestyle they want. We know that that is kind of a demographic trend of the past as well. So people get older and then they come back to the suburb. But I think we might be at a tipping point on that, where a lot of these young people, having lived in the city, they're going to choose those denser, more walkable downtown areas like Huntington, Great Neck, to give a couple other examples, as their destination. So a place like Merrick, I think, has to do some work to kind of catch up to some of those other communities. It's not just about the single-family home anymore. And we also have a much more diverse population, and that diverse population wants more housing choices. They don't just want that traditional home.
You teach a course, it's called Sustainable Cities.
I do.
And we'll get to this in a few minutes. You've been very active at the United Nations.
Yeah.
You've been kind of a global figure in this this push for sustainability. And here's a Newsday story just from last year where it's pointed out that this is a conference that you were involved in Salt Lake City. And at the conference, raised was how 55% of the world's 7.6 billion people live in urban areas, according to UN estimates. And urban includes suburban, apparently.
Yes.
And by the year 2050, some 68% of the world will call a city, and in parentheses also suburbia, reaching out from that city, home.
Correct.
this transition? It's from where to where?
A lot of people are living in rural villages in less developed countries, and they are seeking out the city for the same reason that residents in the United States did. Long Island used to be a very rural set of counties, and as the industrial revolution got underway, the late 1800s, and New York City's population began to grow, the first suburbs in the country really formed in places like Brooklyn, and the suburbs kept spreading out from there. So around the world, the same kind of phenomenon is happening, whereas economic development take hold, as education levels rise, needs for more advanced healthcare services, people are able to afford those services, people tend to seek out the cities, the cultural life of cities.
Now, one of the conferences that you were involved in fact, you co-chaired this conference in Korea. Now, I've been to Korea.
Yeah.
And Seoul is like, it's so crowded.
Fast.
And then I'm thinking of another Asian city, Beijing.
Yeah.
I mean, the people wear masks in Beijing.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking of Bangkok. I mean, the highway from the airport to downtown Bangkok, sometimes the traffic jams are so bad that it takes hours to make a 45-minute trip.
Yeah.
I just wonder, I mean, can these kind of places with these huge populations be made sustainable? You mentioned Patchogue, you mentioned Huntington,
Yeah.
but that's here on Long Island. We're talking about large masses of people crowding into the cities
Yeah.
in our time. How do you get them to be, or get these cities to be sustainable?
Big question. Big question. And we can place that also in the context of climate change and the urgency for becoming more sustainable in terms of our energy uses. So the transit-oriented development I mentioned before is really kind of a first step among a whole cascade of things that would have to happen. But one of the benefits of higher density living is it is a reduction in the use of energy. So it's more efficient in terms of transportation from an energy point of view, and smaller living units are also more energy efficient. So those are just the beginnings. I think one of the big transformations we're just beginning to step into now is re-examining our relationship with the natural world and nature. We've looked at nature as something that we would conquer, something that we could harvest resources from and that would sustain our way of life. And now we're at this point where we're going to need to use nature in a different way, where we have to invest more in natural systems, because that's one of the most effective ways of reducing carbon emissions in the atmosphere. We can use the forest, for example. We can do reforestation, and those new forests can be absorbing the CO2 from the atmosphere. And we can start to do the same in the oceans as well. They're starting to form kelp beds, and the kelp is apparently quite effective and efficient at absorbing that carbon dioxide as well and storing that carbon dioxide. So these are strategies that we can start to do much more aggressively around the world. So how does that affect the cities? Well, when it comes to life in the cities, we have to stop thinking just in terms of the commodity side of the city, the buying and the selling. We have to start thinking about the fact that the cities themselves, particularly these large, vast metropolitan regions, are part of that natural world. And we need to invest in ecological systems in order for those cities to be healthier. You mentioned the air pollution in Beijing. So they're undergoing, big changes in their thinking around transportation. They don't want to have that hangover of awful air quality for another 50 years. So they've got to reduce the consumption of coal, and they've got to get people out of gas-guzzling cars and into electric cars. China's leading the world today in the production of electric cars. So we have to be careful about kind of looking at China and seeing them as kind of backward relative to the United States. They may, in fact, leapfrog in front of us in certain key industries. So we have to think about the city from the perspective of nature. We have to think about the rural landscapes with new eyes, and think about how we invest in that landscape, rebuild our soils. And it's less about taking from that natural system and finding a new sense of balance.
Part of the title of this conference that you co-chaired in Korea is Achieving Sustainable Development Goals Together. And I think a lot of people would think sustainable development is an oxymoron.
Sure.
But you're kind of suggesting a new form, a new way of development.
Exactly. So we've been struggling at this for decades now. We want to have a prosperous lifestyle, and that has been a requirement to take from those natural systems. So we try to protect nature, and we want to take more, and that contradiction is kind of baked into there. And there's also the contradiction between generations. The more we're taking, the less we're leaving for the future. And sustainable development was defined in the 80s as in an intergenerational way. We've given a lot of lip service to that. So the young people who have been speaking out on climate change now, they are a great new voice, letting us know that the next generation is very concerned about what's happening to the natural world. And we're now getting, I think, a more sophisticated intergenerational conversation going on about climate and sustainable development. The model of development that I was just referring to, some people are calling regenerative economics. So it's still an economic model of development, but it's also in balance with the natural world. Regenerative meaning that when we work with nature, we're always trying to regenerate these natural systems. We want to ensure the biological diversity of the planet, the productivity of the planet is sustained as we sustain ourselves. So we're going to think about industries in very different ways as we do that.
Could you point to, you pointed here on Long Island to Huntington
Yeah.
and Patchogue, where they're trying to redevelop actually in a new way. Nations, countries,
Yeah.
considering your activity at the United Nations, that are kind of models, if not in whole, in part, of this new form of development you speak of.
So unfortunately, in the United States, our president, Donald Trump, has decided that we don't need to be a party to the Paris Agreement, which was an international agreement in 2015 that all nations would voluntarily reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. So he's in the process of, this will take us the rest of 2020 to accomplish, but he's in this process of withdrawing from that Paris Agreement. All the other nations of the world, however, are signatories to that agreement. And it's a bit odd that the United States, this economic and cultural leader, is stepping aside from this important international agreement. And of course, many people in the United States disagree with that. But a country like Costa Rica is moving forward very aggressively with plans to be 100% renewable in their energy systems. They want to get out of the fossil fuel industries, and they want to rely on solar power and wind power, hydropower. They're going to use the renewable technologies to power their society. The ambassador to Costa Rica was talking about how the oceans and the forests are these kind of living systems that are breathing in harmony with humanity. So as humanity is releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, these natural systems are absorbing that carbon dioxide into their living systems. And so thinking about the world in that way, this kind of breathing in, breathing out process of humans seeking balance with the natural world, a lot of countries are exploring this kind of yin-yang kind of thinking about the world, in addition to their very eager plans to industrialize and bring economic prosperity to their society. But they know that the kind of industrialization they're going to engage in is going to be different. It's got to be an ecological model of industrialization. We've got to, stop with the mine it, produce it, and then discard it. Linear thinking of economics. We have to find a circular model of economics where we reuse all the materials over and over again. And a lot of countries are finding that to be an exciting new way to think. The engineers of those countries are investing in that. Corporations are looking at this. Governments are looking at this. So we're a little bit behind the curve here. New York City did its first Circular Economy Week last year. So this will be the second time they do it this coming spring. So these ideas are starting to take hold here, but they've been talking about this for more like a decade now in Europe, and we're just starting to pay attention to those conversations.
And, does it matter what kind of economic system a country might have? I mean, critics of capitalism say, well, only the bottom line matters, and if the world is ravaged, well, if there's profit, that's fine. On the other hand, I've been to Russia numerous times and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, and what a mess under communism. I mean, it's disastrous, even though they claimed in the Soviet time that their Marxist system would be better environmentally. Does it matter whether it's capitalism or socialism or communism for a country to be ecocentric or biocentric, that life and the environment comes first?
We're working on that. I won't presume there are easy answers there. I think the whole political spectrum should be looking at that carefully, talking about it vigorously, and seeing what they can do. So China is a mixed economy, much more socialist than America, but they've got their capitalist elements as well. They've been investing a lot of attention into greening their cities and looking at the circular economic model in terms of what the engineers are looking at for the future of manufacturing there. So I think the socialist countries are quite keen to understand what this is about. So you need a kind of the eye of a master planner, if you will, to think about, okay, how much forested land do we want to maintain? What is the water quality of our rivers? We've got a whole watershed. Watersheds might be international. So governments have to think long. They have to think in terms of multilateral relationships with other countries. So you really need to have that government planning component when you're thinking about ecological development. But you also need the innovation as well that capitalism has been so successful with. And the question is, if you're going to focus just on that bottom line number, how are you going to do that? Are you going to rely on subsidies, the way the oil and gas industry relies heavily on subsidies today? Many people say, take away those subsidies. The oil and gas industry doesn't need them anymore. And if you take them away, you'll actually see a fairly aggressive acceleration in renewable energy in this country. In other words, we're propping up an industry that's at the end of its life, not at the beginning of its life. And so there are very complicated factors there in terms of the left-right elements of the spectrum, and I say do both.
Now, you're deeply involved at Post in it's a new master's program in environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
Most of your students would be, I would think, from Long Island and from New York City.
Yeah.
Do they get it?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. The graduate students seek us out. They get it. They're eager to take what they're learning and go get new jobs. I have to say I'm a little disappointed right now in the regional job market. We don't create the jobs in sustainability just yet that our region needs. Part of it is the nature of our regional economy is a lot of smaller businesses. We certainly have hundreds of people that work for a number of different concerns, but it is hard for our students to find work on Long Island. There are many more sustainability jobs in New York City, but I think internationally the market has opened up a lot more than here. I think that's about to change. Governor Cuomo has announced he wants to go forward with a $3 billion bond to fund environmental work across the state. And I think that's just the beginning of a big change we're going to see regionally in terms of our willingness to make much larger investments. So the jobs for the future students interested in sustainability, I think, are coming and coming relatively soon. New York State also passed a major new piece of legislation on climate change. It happened just last December. And many organizations around New York State are calling for New York to invest $1 billion now to get that underway. So that's really a small down payment on the kinds of changes we are going to need to make statewide in order to protect lower income communities that are often most vulnerable to all the different effects from climate change, as well as to restructure our whole energy sector.
Also, Cuomo just advanced a program for training at Farmingdale State University and at Stony Brook University in training folk to work in offshore wind.
Yeah.
And apparently that's going to be, once wind turbines advance from just being a few around Block Island to,
Yeah.
I mean, the plan is to have many of them.
We could be in the middle of a very large offshore wind industry right here on Long Island, both immediately off our shore, but also north and south of us. So it's going to be interesting to see how that industry develops and where the kind of center of energy for that industry is, whether it's the New York area, Philadelphia area. There's probably going to be some place that really kind of jumps ahead and is able to create a lot of jobs for that region, and then the jobs kind of will move up and down the region depending upon where the particular sites of activity are. So Long Island could be a huge center for that, or Queens, Brooklyn area.
Are you concerned about certain industries hijacking the term sustainability and renewable, these words? I mean, like the nuclear industry, for example, it's been trying to sell its product, nuclear power plants, claiming that they're renewable. And there's other evidence of, well, polluting industries doing greenwashing, moving in and trying to usurp these nice words.
I think we are ready at this point to begin to formalize some of this into legislation at the state and federal level. So we have to kind of provide some teeth to how we use these words. It shouldn't be legal to use words inappropriately that deliberately confuse the public. So the whole idea of whether you're a climate skeptic or you believe in climate science as if these things are equally valid has become a very confusing part of our discussion. I'm not suggesting, certain ways of promoting ideas about climate should themselves be illegal, but when a corporation gives a stamp of approval for its project as being green, there ought to be clear guidelines about what they can or can't say from a legal point of view, just as there are clear guidelines today when you use the term organic. So we're going to see that become a more important part of what government has to provide the public, because we can't live with this level of confusion. Yes, greenwashing is a serious problem, and we have to attend to it. Another related problem is the way the financial sector continues to invest in industries that are very harmful for us. We really don't need new investments happening inside the United States in oil and gas, yet the larger financial interests are continuing to make those investments. There's a lot of money they believe to be made there. But the contrary opinion can equally be valid, that we're going to reach a point relatively quickly where we're going to say, you know what, we can't keep pumping the way we have. We can't just let the market do this. We're going to have to provide regulatory guidance so that we curb the amount that we're consuming in terms of oil and gas, and we therefore set in motion a process that renewable energies will be there to fill the gap. I'm not talking about tomorrow. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30-year timeline.
This is a tough time, frankly, to consider. I mean, all over the world there has been this a sustainability crusade in many countries. But now with the Trump administration in the United States, it seems to me that we're in reversal on so many environmental issues and themes.
Yeah, so the administration in Washington is pro-business, you can say pro-capitalist, and a lot of people would argue, well, let's look at it from that point of view as well. Maybe the way forward with all these energy changes is not the regulatory approach. Maybe what we need to do is put a price on the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere and let that price begin to rise over time, so that as the price of fossil fuels is rising as a consequence of that tax, people therefore have an economic incentive without any additional regulatory overhang to begin to think about, well, what other choices are available to me? I don't want to keep paying more money for this tax that I know is going to increase. So this is very compatible with capitalism. It's really a market failure that we have, and the literature coming from mainstream economics that when you have a market failure, government does need to step in and do something about the pricing system. So that would be another approach that a Republican administration should be quite open to. And I'm not quite sure why this administration is so tone deaf to the idea that the climate science is real. It's extraordinarily serious. We really are in a climate crisis today. But we're not getting any traction from Washington right now in terms of positive policies to move us off of oil and gas.
And that's why you have Governor Cuomo and state and local
Yeah.
leaders saying, well, if Washington is not going to be with us, we're not going to stop doing what we're doing. We're going to go ahead
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. So that's a vital part of our American experience with democracy. We do have a federal system of government, so it's always been important in almost all areas of policy for there to be a variety of experiments that are happening at the state and local level. The federal government learns tremendously from that. A lot of the governors in states, including New York and California, Massachusetts, many others, have said, well, we're going to step in, we're going to make sure that we continue to abide by the Paris Climate Agreement under the terms that Barack Obama had established for us. Again, those were voluntary agreements that were established. The Obama administration said, these are the things we believe we can do, and this is our plan. Nobody imposed that on the United States. So the Trump administration could easily turn around and say, well, there were certain things we didn't like about what the Obama administration put together. This is our revised plan. And hopefully that plan could be even a better plan. It's purely voluntary, so it's absurd to step aside from something that's constructed in that way.
Well, he's into denial of climate change, sort of like the Prime Minister of Australia.
Yeah.
And as we tape this show today, Australia is burning largely because of climate change, and we don't want to see the United States burning and having climate change impact on it in other ways. Thank you so much, Scott Carlin.
Thank you, Karl.
You've been watching Environment Long Island. I'm Karl Grossman. Thank you for watching.